Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Stewardship exclusive Wine.com Day webinar. This is the first webinar in our series this week, and we are really excited to have you all. A few folks are still trickling in, so we will give them one more minute to join. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wine.com Day webinar. This is our first of 3 webinars over the next 3 days featuring top importers and distributors from around the country. We couldn't be more excited to kick off with anyone other than Wilson Daniels, one of the top importers and distributors in the whole country with one of the most respected portfolios of wines from across the world. And we have William Davies here today to help explain and walk us through this fantastic portfolio of wines and introduce the 3 producers who we'll be interviewing today.
So Wilson Daniels, we are based in Napa Valley, although we have an office in New York, but we were founded in 1978. And to think of that, it's kind of funny that we talk about 1978 because of what's been happening over the last year with the Judgment of Paris. So you think 2 years after 1976, the bicentennial. And with the Judgment of Paris tasting, there were many of these wineries from Napa that were starting to gain traction throughout the United States and really finding places on those top wine lists, as well as those shelves on the independent retailers around the country. And that was really where Jack Daniels and Win Wilson started their journey and partnered up together, because at that time they were national sales managers for Chapelet and for Cuvée Somme, respectively. So, you've got these two, great wineries in Napa Valley, but, they needed to really spread the word. And so they started to add more producers to the portfolio. Caymus was one of the early additions, to think about that in 1978 with the Wagners, as well as some others. But in 1979, that all changed when Aubert de Villaine, as well as La Louise Leroy, when they were co-directors of the domain, as we refer it to, which is DRC. Most people think of it as DRC. In 1979, when they joined the portfolio. And so almost 60, really, you think about this kind of the 60-year movement of what had happened in Napa Valley, and now 50 years almost with Wilson Daniels. We represent 60 wineries from around the world, and we do believe them to be at the top of their game, either as a historical perspective or in simply qualitative levels that you see in their respective regions. So it's an incredible collection of families that we represent, and we're so honored to be able to tell their stories across the United States and around the world.
And I think it's really interesting to kind of dig in there, because I think a lot of people may not be familiar with certain importers or groups like yourself who actually take the time to carefully craft this book and make sure those are the stories that you're telling, rather than just trying to pick the wineries that you think may help the bottom line the most. So
you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges with importers. Refer to them suppliers as well, but importers to the United States, you either make the decision to focus on a specific region and just be really, really good and do the mile deep expression in your book or in your portfolio. What we have been very careful and thoughtful in our process is to find those producers that, when you think of a region, there are 2, maybe 3 wineries that you would associate with that region from a qualitative and historical aspect. And we'd like to think that those are represented in our portfolio.
Fantastic. Well, shall we dive into our interviews here coming up?
I would love to hear what Fede has to say. I remember the first time I went to Volpaia, I went to the village, and stepping off of the bus, and I say this loosely because when you get to the top of the switchback as you pass the vineyards of Balafico and Coltasalo, you're at this village that is 1,000 years old. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself on these cobblestone streets, and you find yourself thrown back into the time of the Medicis. You find yourself, back in the time of the Renaissance. It's an incredible place to visit.
Fantastic. Well, without further ado, here's our first producer interview of this webinar with Castello di Volpaia. Hi, Federica. Thanks so much for joining the Wine.com Day webinar.
Very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, I'm really excited to dive into your family's estate and the wines. Could you first start with maybe a little introduction of yourself, and then we'll dive into a little bit about where you're located and the varieties you work with?
So my name is Federica. My surname is too long. It's Mascheroni-Stianti. So added the surname of my mother and my father. So it's both of them. In Italy, usually you get only the surname of the father, but we decided to have both. I'm part of the family, and so Volpaia is really a family business. There is also my brother Nicolò, but the real boss is my mom Giovanna, or Giovannella, depends about the mood of my mom. We are located in the Chianti Classico, next to Radda in Chianti, very high elevated. It's over 600 meters above the sea level, that it's more than 2,000 feet above the sea level. And obviously the core business is the Sangiovese, the Chianti Classico, and but we have also a small production of white wines in Maremma, so on the seaside of Tuscany, next to Castiglione della Pescaia, Vermentino grapes there.
Fantastic, fantastic. So next question, and this is kind of broad. If someone has never heard about Volpaia ever in their lives, what would be the first thing you would want them to know about the wines and the winery?
It's definitely not easy, because I think when the people drinks Volpaia, I think the most important things for me is for them to come to see the place, because at the moment that they see the place, they even breathe more the wine. So when they drink a glass of wine, I think they can discover inside the wine the elevation, the beauty of the wine cellar, because it's not a normal wine cellar. It's a wine cellar included in a medieval village. So you have a 12th century village, totally conserved as it was. So all the technology for the fermentation had to flow from the roof and get through the roof and fit inside the 12th century village. And then you have even a stainless steel pipeline that runs the ground and connect the different buildings. So it's something that can be found at the end inside this special Chianti Classico. So it's not only Sangiovese, it's not only grape, it's also a work in a very unique place. And I think the people that really working with us are really magic people. They are able to manage in such a unique wine estate. And this is, we can say, an invitation for everybody. Why not?
Yeah, you have places for people to stay as well. Yeah, that's right. I love the term. Also, a lot of people use gravity in their fermentation process or their aging process, moving wine from one place to another, but not many people call it a vino duct, which I really like that term you guys have.
Yeah, the vino dotto, it's really the tubes that runs, but even the Italians, when they come, say, oh, really? Yeah, it's like the underground stainless steel pipelines that moves technically really from the highest part of the village where we have the fermentation to the bottom part of the village where we have the aging. and move the wine from one place to the other one. So you can even walk on the wine. And so it's quite unique.
Yeah, wow. For our viewers who may not be as familiar, can you elaborate a little bit on Chianti Classico and what makes it special and different than Chianti? And then maybe also a little bit about Radda, the general area, and why that's special within Chianti Classico itself.
So Chianti Classico, it's a denomination that I think it's growing in historical moment that is not really, nothing is growing so much, but I think really the Chianti Classico, technically, it's one of the denominations that is growing very much. There is a lot of work by the consortium, but basically is also about the microclimate of the place. And talking specifically to Radda, I think is one of the character of Radda. It's all the hills that we have in the area with a lot of forests. I think it's more than 75 or 80% of the surface of Radda, it's forest, and the rest are vineyards. So the percentage of the forest compared to the vineyards create a really incredible microclimate, plus the hills that created the shadows. So before, probably everybody was looking for hot and sun. Now everybody is looking for elevation, shadows, and cool temperature that comes from the forest. That is very, very important for sure, and create the difference inside the glass of the Chianti Classico. So, and the Sangiovese grapes that comes from this land has really a quite distinctive character that I think was one of the reasons why in the past was a bit much more difficult to be understood. And now it's really well appreciated because I think the freshness and the acidity that you can find inside the glass, it's something that makes you drink another glass instead of get bored and stuck and tired about a tough wine to be drinking. But here you have tannins and at the same time the fruitful part that are making the balance in the mouth, and especially do it with a nice plate of something next to. It's our culture. Sit at the table, glass of wine and food. This is the way that we drink wines for sure.
Yeah, yeah, the Italian way. With that, I think it's also important, or I would love to hear more about the different bottlings that you have, because I think, well, it is predominantly a single variety or varietal wine. It is something that's can express itself in different ways, and then also just a little bit of blending something else in or leaving it by itself can change the character of the wine. Can you talk a little bit about maybe that and your different levels, the Gran Selezione, Reserva, etc.?
Yeah, so we do all the wines. So we go from Chianti Classico to Reserva, Gran Selezione, and then also an IGT, something that goes out from the roads of the Chianti Classico. So I think we can give a touch also to the Chianti Classico, that it's made not only with Sangiovese for us. We add a small percentage of Merlot, but why? Volpaia is really high elevated. It's over 600 meters above the sea level, almost 2,000 feet above the sea level. So what it means? It means nice freshness, but at the same time, some angles. So the Merlot helps really to round the wine. I think with the changing of the weather, we were almost thinking to take out the Merlot. But then you have a vintage like 2024 that was, I don't know, in the last few years, a crazy vintage. I think it's quite a common word, but 2024 was another crazy vintage. And so the Merlot helped us. And so why? It is a nice touch of grape that smooth sometimes the angles that you can have in a simple Chianti Classico. But at the same time, we have a Riserva that comes from the same exactly vineyard, but it's the best of the grape. And there it's only Sangiovese. So not adding any extra grapes. So it's really the expression of the Sangiovese. But at the same time, we had an extra year of aging. And what it helps, the extra year of aging helps to round and to settle all the flavors and to be more ready for the public since the bottling. As soon as you bottle, it's ready to be drinking. Then we go, these two wines we can say are a selection of grapes from the different vineyards. So it's more or less an expression of Volpaia. What is Volpaia, we can say, is a triangle. On top is Volpaia, with another small vineyards on top of it here. And then below you have all the vineyards. Then more or less in this center part, east side, around 500 meters, 1,500 feet, we have our single vineyards, where the most historical one is the Coltasala, that it's Sangiovese, with a 5% of a local grape called Mammolo. Have you ever heard about Mammolo? No, don't worry. It's quite uncommon, even for the Italians. Mammolo means violet, the little flower. So it's a touch of flower inside. At the same time, it was like a grape like the Ciliegiolo, the Canaiolo, was a grape that you were adding to the Sangiovese to support a little bit more the Sangiovese. And specifically, it was giving a bit much more color and much more floral bouquet. And this wine was born in the 1980, when at that time you were not allowed to have a Chianti Classico was made with the 95% of Sangiovese. So it was born as vino da tavola, the lowest category that you can ever have. And then grow by slowly, and as soon as the rules of the Chianti Classico changed, became a Chianti Classico Riserva at the beginning, and now a Gran Selezione. But what it is incredible, it's in the 80s, all of this was not allowed. So we can say that my mother was a bit a pioneer of the future of the Chianti Classico. So she was able to see that the Sangiovese was really the expression of the place. And so we can say that now the Gran Selezione, it's made with 90% of Sangiovese up to 100, with a 10% of only local grape. So more or less as it was the Coltasala. Second Gran Selezione that we make is the Casanova, Il Puro. Il Puro because it's a pure Sangiovese from Volpaia, and it's made with 25 Sangiovese, 25 clones of Sangiovese, autochthon from Volpaia. So consider that the project started in the 2000. We are in the 2026, and we have not yet finished. These are the timing of agriculture, really long. So all the decision needs more time, because the project would like to end to find our own really Sangiovese clone, and so slowly by slowly raft the vineyards or replant with one of these Sangiovese. But now is a wine. So Casanova Il Puro, it's 100% of Sangiovese made with 25 different clones of Sangiovese. The third single vineyard is Balifico. So all the names are coming from the names of the vineyard. Why? In the past, each single vineyard had a name, because you didn't have a cell phone. You had to tell, where are you going to work? And your wife was able to come to control if you were really working or not. And so you were telling, I'm going to Coltasala. And so each single vineyard really have his own name. So we said, if they have the name, why don't we give the name to the wine? And so Coltasala, Casanova, and now we talk about Banifico. But Banifico is a bit different, because 1/3 of the vineyard, it's made with Cabernet Sauvignon. So obviously we pick the Sangiovese in one moment and the Cabernet Sauvignon in another one. So we ferment it separately, and then we blend in the second moment together. But basically, we want to have a wine with a much more structure. So if you like more border wine, I would suggest you for sure to go with this one, because the Cabernet gives even more intensity in the color. You know, Sangiovese is more recognizable for the ruby color. When you talk about the Cabernet inside the Balifico, you have much more purple colors inside and more structure. So we can say this is a smallest a touch of the different wines from Volpaia, from the Chianti Classico.
Oh, that was perfect. And I think this has been a fantastic overview of Volpaia and your wine. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you very much, really.
All right, that was our interview with Castello di Volpaia. I hope everybody learned a ton about the winery and their wines, and you can go find all of the bottles that are available in your local market on Wine.com right now. But next, we are excited to transition from the old world in Italy over to the United States and interview with Schramsberg. Do you want to share a little bit, William, about what makes Schramsberg special in the world of U.S. and sparkling wines?
Well, I think that what you said about the US and sparkling wines, they in many ways started the direction for traditional method sparkling wines in the United States. You know, we wouldn't be thinking of producers, you know, many of them French transplants. You know, you think about the incredible champagne houses that looked at the north coast of California as being a viable place to grow grapes for traditional method sparkling wine. I don't think that that would have happened had it not been for the Davies family and their visionary approach to, you know what, everyone's growing, you know, red and white grape varieties and making still wines in Napa, Sonoma, and throughout the north coast of California. But nobody's really talking about making sparkling wines and doing that, should I say, with the same attention to detail that you find in those classic regions like Champagne, for example. So I do believe that they are an iconoclast when it comes to not only sparkling wine in the United States, but just American wine in general.
All right. Now on to our interview with Hugh Davies of Schramsberg Vineyards. Hi, Hugh. Thanks so much for joining the Wine.com Day webinar.
Billy, great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course, I'm really excited to share the Schramsberg portfolio with everyone today, as well as we can lightly touch on the Davies wines. But I really want to get in on what is really one of the pinnacles of traditional method sparkling wine in the U.S. So if you could share a little bit about maybe your role in the company, your family's history, and the wines you make.
All right, outstanding. So today, I'm second generation. My parents started in 1965. When they started, they were, novice winemakers. Granted, everybody around was kind of a novice winemaker. 60 years ago, there were 20 wineries in Napa. Today, there are 570. There were about 200 acres of Chardonnay planted in the whole state of California. Today, it's well over 100,000, right? So our world has changed a lot. But anyhow, mom and dad wanted to do traditional method sparkling, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, kind of like they do in the Champagne district of France. Well, we're going to do that in California. What? Yeah, that's what they wanted to do. And they were going to try to not only do it, but make a living doing it. So it is pretty exciting. We push hard for 60. We've just started our 62nd harvest today. So we've been doing it a while. I jumped in my 20s and then eventually came back full time at the age of 30. But I worked in France a bit, in Champagne and in Cognac, in Australia. I worked at Mom Napa. I have a master's degree from UC Davis in winemaking. Not a bad path, actually. I'm very thankful that I was encouraged to do all those things. But I've been back here since '96, so 30 years. And we've taken what my parents started, and with a great team, we've been able to build it a little further, expand the range of sparkling wines that we produce. And then also we've developed the Davies red wine program and with a winery as well, where we're making delicious cabs and pinots.
Fantastic. Yeah. So for your range of sparkling wines, can you talk a little bit about what makes each of the distinct lines unique, and also a little bit more about your longer aging and late disgorge program too? I love those wines.
Yeah. If you go back to the 60s when we started, we had a Blanc de Blanc, which is made from Chardonnay, right? Traditional method, Chardonnay with a bottle fermentation. And then we added a Blanc Noir. So the Blanc Noir, basically a Pinot Noir, brewed sparkling, traditional method, bottle fermentation. And then we added a Rosé where you've got to ferment a little bit of the Pinot in contact with skins, somehow versus as you get a little duller, and then that goes in. And usually you add some tart Chardonnay to kind of keep that a nice balance. Back in the day, they used a different varietal, Valdeggy, which some people would still might have a little bit of around here, but they were crafting, something that was fairly unique in the U.S. wine market, and in the California wine industry. These sparkling wines made from the traditional French Champagne varietals. Hard to believe that there wasn't much Chardonnay and Pinot Noir around in the '60s, but there just wasn't. In 1965, the number one wine grape in Napa was Riesling, and the number one wine was Chablis. The number two wine was Burgundy. What? I know but that's what they call this. It was less about the varietal, it was more about the color, right? We make white wine, we make red wine. So things have evolved a lot since then, and it's been exciting to be a part of that. Our sparkling program started to evolve with some depth through the 70s, and as we got better at this, we were starting to work with cooler sites further down valley. Eventually the 80s we're down the Carneros. Okay, now we're right next to the bay, higher acid. And it was during the 80s that we started toying with the idea of making, stretching our sparkling range. The J. Shrem set today, some people know, the first vintage of was 87. And that's kind of the pinnacle of our effort. We do maybe 5-6% of our total production. We call J. Shrem. Today there's a Blanc, which is made from Chardonnay, and Noir, made from Pinot Noir or Rosé. Sometimes we'll do late discord generations of those things, where not only we're aging for the 8 years on the yeast as we would with the regular J. Shrem, but maybe it's 15. Maybe we'll go for 25. So we've done a little bit of that, which is obviously you can't do in your first 25 years. you gotta have some inventory. It's been around for a while. And hopefully really tasty inventory. So 25 years later, tastes great, right? So that's been exciting. And then also in the 80s, we developed at a slightly more modest price point, the Mirabelle set, and there were multi-vintage. So it's not just 1 year, but multiple years blended together. And we'll typically age those for about 2 years in contact with the yeast inside the bottle. So still traditional method, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but made a little more quickly and at a slightly more modest price point. And so we really have those three tiers: Mirabelle set, Schramsberg set, J. Shrem set.
Perfect. And then when it comes to when somebody's being introduced to the brand or first learning about Schramsberg, what is the first thing you want them to either know, or where should they start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what resonates with people, people love the fact that it's a family operation. I can't even believe it's already 60 years. That means I'm 60, right? But we're, I guess, technically 61. Just started our 62nd harvest. So I missed the initial bit. I wasn't technically here. But it's, I think that's exciting. I think that our focus on, this traditional method, the storage of these bottles and these caves here on Diamond Mountain. People come, they can't believe it. It's kind of a fairly unique site, unique operation, a unique occupation, right? To make these bottle fermented sparkling wines. But one thing that I feel like is not as well understood or appreciated is just the depth that we might go to in making the initial range of base wines with which we then craft our blends over these last number of years. And we're making over 300 base wines every vintage, right? And so that's a lot to do. It's a lot to keep track of. We've got barrels, we've got tanks, a little bit of malolactic fermentation, vineyards that are scattered across the North Coast, Mendocino, Sonoma, Marin, coming back over to Napa and the Carneros. And every year the opportunity to not only craft another set of blends, but also to make this killer set of base wines that I think is really, that's allowed us to push our craft, kind of to the nth degree. And only it's the pursuit of the ultimate quality, right? I mean, we're not pursuing it to make as much as we possibly can, but more to figure out how do we make this stuff taste so delicious and that it would last so long in the bottle, all that. So it's been pretty fun to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that people may not consider as much when they're looking at the multi-vintage or the non-vintage bottlings. What are there any vintages that really stand out to you, either in your memory for good or bad, or just
Right.
recent releases that have distinct characters that you would like to touch on?
Yeah, I think that part of the beautiful thing about making these wines is that you get yourself up the plate every year and try again, right? So that's pretty. If you didn't like don't worry, we'll have another opportunity another year. But every year is different. Every year has its unique challenges. Some seasons for us are going to be very early, like this one here, 2026. Wow, we're picking the first of our grapes in July. Has that happened before? Yep, not that often. Maybe once every 10 years, something like that. And typically it's really light crop that got ripened a little earlier. Interestingly, the acidity is super high in some of these really early seasons, even though that might not be what people would otherwise think. The flavor density is pretty concentrated in these tiny little berries, right, that happen to get ripe fairly early. So years like 15, 26, don't know too much about 26, but we've started it, right? 2004, 97 kind of fit on one end of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum are also some of these years that might be challenging for a different reason. Maybe it's super wet. Maybe we've had so much rain we can't get things to ripen like we would want to. And normally there it's more of a the last things that we harvest, frankly, are these red grapes for red wines, Cabernet, right? And years like 11, wow, that was different. Wait a second, we're supposed to make 14% alcohol Cabernet. Yeah, maybe not this year. Maybe we'll be good with 13. Why? Because that's it. The season is over. The leaves are falling off the vines, and that's all. That's as ripe as we got. 98 was another year like that. And some people may bemoan those vintages, but they sure are interesting, right? And to go back and to taste some of those wines and to compare them with the vintages that maybe got the higher scores or whatever. To me, I like them all. I get asked the question a lot. Which is your favorite vintage? They're all pretty darn good. They're all pretty. They're different. They're not all the same, but that doesn't mean that some are bad and some are good.
Yeah, 100%. Some are just interesting in different ways. Yeah,
that's right. And so as I think of vintages, I often think of them on that spectrum. Like sometimes the ones in the middle you kind of lose track of a little bit more. Like, oh yeah, 06. What was that? What was that? That wasn't 04. 04 for sure. Remember, 07. That was. But it's interesting to go back and look at those, and then you have to scratch your head and go, so what was that vintage really like? You remember 11. You remember 98. Another one you might remember is 2020. And for those of us around here, or 17, we ended up with some fires around the Napa Sonoma area, although they came later in the season, impacting the Cabernet a little bit, but not too bad. But everything else is pretty much done, so no worries. But in 2020, wow, the first fire showed up in August, and it kind of got in the way of a lot of stuff. And if you recall, that year we also had the COVID pandemic restrictions, and so people are supposed to keep their distance from one another and wear the masks and all the rest of it. We still got to operate, so that was good. But yeah, I just felt like everything that could have been a challenge in 2020. we got a lot of challenges. Ultimately didn't make as much wine in 2020. It was a fairly dry year, fairly early year. But yeah, by the time these wildfires really started burning around Napa County, especially towards the end of September, it chased a lot of us out of the season altogether. We made about 10% of the Cabernet that we planned on that year, as an example.
Wow.
Yeah, the hills on both sides of the valley were on fire, and vines were in the midst of, they didn't necessarily burn down, but you you can't go out and pick grapes when there are active fires burning in the area. And so we lost a good couple of weeks right when we were supposed to be picking Cabernet. You come back out later, everything's a little bit cooked, right? So how do we? Yeah, probably don't make what you planned on making anymore. So fortunately, we've only had that experience the one time.
Yeah, that's good. Well, on that note, while we before we wrap up here, do you want to just quickly go over the Davies wines? Not obviously we have only a little bit of time, but high level profile, and then just so people can know to look for wines made with the same ethos and care that Schramsberg are.
Yeah. So the with the reds, we make Cabernets and we make Pinot Noirs. So Cabernet Sauvignons and Pinot Noirs. On the Cabernet side, the first red wine that we would produce was our J. Davies Estate Diamond Mountain Cab. So my dad was Jack. We put J. Davies on that wine. He'd passed away, so we thought we would honor him. And so we reference our Diamond Mountain Vineyard property here as the J. Davies Estate. We added a little later to that, ultimately maybe 12 years later, the J. Davies Jamie, which is the signature crown jewel in that J. Davies Estate portfolio from the property. But we do a little bit, maybe 8 barrels a year, something like that, of the Jamie with my mom's signature to honor her. But we also make a little range of other Napa cabs from sites in St. Helena, Calistoga, Oakville, Coombsville, Howell Mountain. And then we do our Davies Napa Cab, which is kind of a composite blend of all the above. That's the one you'd see the most. We make the most of that, a couple thousand cases. And then we're making some delicious Pinots as well. And so the first vintage that we did at Davies Pinot was in 2009. There are a couple of sites up in the Anderson Valley, including the Farrington Vineyard that we've worked with every year since 2009. Delicious, relatively lean a Pinot, which I think people would enjoy. In the Russian River area, there's the Kiefer Ranch, which is an estate vineyard for us today that we also work with in making a delicious Pinot. And we do a little bit down the Carneros and then also up in the Fort Rossivio pocket of the Sonoma coast. So all those wines are made at the Davies Winery in St. Helena. We do tastings as well down there daily. And then, we'll be getting started. It won't be in July, but somewhere in August, we'll be getting started with our Davies Pinot harvest here in 2026.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Wine.com Day, and we appreciate all of the work you do, both for sparkling and still wines.
Hey, thank you, Billy, again. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
All right, that was our interview with Schramsberg. I hope everybody enjoyed. I know they are, like William said before, the winery that actually turned me on to American traditional method sparkling in the first place, which was really exciting for me. Now moving up to another place that is also producing traditional method sparkling in a big way, but we're not going to talk about that today. The Willamette Valley. I'm excited to talk about Bergstrom and the wines that they are producing in one of my favorite wine regions in the country. William, can you share a little bit more?
Absolutely. I feel that we tend to talk about Willamette Valley, at least through the lens of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, as being the Burgundian counterpart for a New World wine region. We think about California in terms of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay as a style. And then Willamette Valley is the one that's closer to an old world expression of Burgundy. But when you think about Bergstrom, there's a Burgundian heart to the family and to how Josh and Carolyn ended up meeting and really starting this winery with Josh's father. And when you do get a chance to talk to Josh, it shows you not only what he has learned over the last 25 or 30 years, but how growing grapes in a place like Willamette Valley is not only one of the most magical places to grow grapes, but it can also be one of the most challenging. I'm reminded of the 2020, the 2021 and 2022 vintages in Willamette Valley. And the reason for that is that in 2020, of course, we were talking in the midst of COVID, but the fires that were occurring on the West Coast, most importantly, those that were up in Oregon themselves with the Mackenzie fire that decimated so many of the vineyards and the fruit harvests of 2020 in August and September, we came back with a beautiful vintage in 2021. It's almost if the Mother Nature and the gods had spared from the challenges of the previous years. But in 2022, there was a pretty devastating frost that occurred in April, and it was really focused on the northern part of Willamette Valley, which is where the majority of the vineyards that the Bergstrom family own. And they are a really small, tight-knit team at the winery. And the fact that even through those challenges, and we see it in a place like Burgundy all the time, that they're still able to make incredible wines just shows how good a job that Josh and Carolyn and the rest of the team do year in and year out to bring the wines that we can show to everyone around the country and the world.
Yes, I've been lucky enough to have a few, and they are consistently fantastic. So without further ado, here is Josh Bergström from Bergstrom Wines. Hi, Josh. Thanks so much for joining us for the Wine.com Day webinar.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to share your wines and the wines of the Willamette with our viewers today. So if you could start, maybe share a little bit about who you are, your winery, and the varieties you work with.
Yes, absolutely. Bergstrom Wines is 28 vintages old. It was created by my mom and dad, John and Karen Bergstrom. My father is a Swedish immigrant to the United States, so we are a first-generation American family. And my father grew up in a northern agricultural logging community in a communal household of 7 people. They hunted, they fished, they grew potatoes. His mother, Sigrid, which we have a Chardonnay that we named after her, was the switchboard operator for 3 different villages within that community. And he was very fortunate that he was sponsored by his aunt and uncle at the age of 17 to come to America. And he really started an American dream story for him and, essentially planted a new family tree here in Oregon and went on to become a great OBGYN surgeon, a man with amazing work ethic, 5 kids in the family. And at one point in his life decided after a really wonderful medical career to maybe retire and return to agriculture. And so he came back to the Dundee Hills and bought a beautiful piece of land and thought about planting maybe blueberries or lingonberries, and then looked around him and saw this burgeoning wine community and said, well, what if we tried our hand at that? We knew nothing about wine. And he called me one day. I was a business student at the University of Oregon. He said, what if we started a family business together? And that really launched this amazing family adventure story of learning everything we could, voraciously reading every book we could find at the UC Davis bookstore, traveling to classes in California and here in Oregon, and then finally moving to Burgundy, France to study winemaking as a postgraduate student, and then planting our vineyards and getting started. So that's who we are. We're a family-owned and operated company, first-generation American. We have 20 great team members in a vertically integrated company. So we farm our own grapes, we make our own wine, and then we bring those wines to market both locally, nationally, and internationally.
Yeah, fantastic. So the next question was going to be if somebody was just being introduced to Bergstrom wines for the first time, what would you tell them? I feel like you might have just shared that, but is there anything else that you would want them to know right off the bat?
Well, I mentioned some of it, but I think it's quite rare these days to have an American winery that is still independently owned and operated, a family business, family owned and operated. We are primarily a woman-run company and vertically integrated. So we actually farm our own grapes. We don't have a large farming company do it for us. We don't have a hired winemaker in some large warehouse making wine for us. We We have our own team that does it all, and we work together. We actually have a slogan at Bergstrom Wines, which is 1,000 days of effort, which means it just reminds us all that we have a year of farming, a year of winemaking, and a year of sales, and we all work together collaboratively to bring these true, authentic artisan products to market. And a lot of those words have become jargon over time and overused by large companies who are trying to potentially mask the fact that they're quite large and want the consumer to think they're small. But we remain truly one of those companies that is doing it on our own, and we have been for almost 30 years.
Yeah, very cool. And something else you guys have been doing for over 30 years, or as long as you've existed, is the farming in what I love you guys term is a non-certified biodynamic. Can you share a little bit more about how you guys decided to do that?
I came to biodynamic and organic agricultural practices right off the bat as a student. My father being a doctor, of course, he was interested in health and vitality, and we wanted to make a product that was full of health and vitality. Wine goes back 8,000 years and is all about those things. It can't be lumped into some evil alcohol campaign. Wine is all about bringing people around a table together, and in moderation, of course, enjoying this beautiful beverage that is farmed by hand. And so we knew that wine, like coffee or tea, is a maceration product, meaning that there's only one ingredient, it's grapes. And so if you farm grapes harshly with herbicides, pesticides, systemic fungicides, anything with a side after it, which is essentially death, and of course, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizers, or things like that, you're going to be ingesting those things. And so from the very beginning, Bergstrom Wines has used only compost, botanical teas, and mineral homeopathic sprays on our vines. We have used none of those harsh chemicals. And then on the winemaking side, very laissez-faire, really trying to bring a purity product of vitality to people's tables.
Right, right. And then with that, you guys also decided to plant right off the bat Pinot Noir and Chardonnay together. I think a lot of folks may be hearing about Chardonnay from the Willamette Valley, and it's becoming a fad for more people to plant, although it has been planted and planted well for a long time, and you were one of the earlier ones with that.
Oregon has always been making fantastic Chardonnays, but we make it in such small quantities. So Oregon produces only 2% of all American wine by volume. And Chardonnay is less than 7% of what we make in the state totality, right? So we're talking about niche products here, so which I think is great for consumers, because if you're looking for things that are just really hard to find and delicious, Oregon's Willamette Valley is where you find it. And Chardonnay is one of those things. There's so many passionate people here who are making Chardonnay. We have always championed Chardonnay because I think that the Willamettean, which is the word I give to the climate of the Willamette Valley, Willamettean wines are showcasing what Mother Nature gives us as a gift, which is bright, natural acidity. And so our wines are succulent. They have this wonderful kind of saline, salty, mineral quality to them. And so they go great with everything that we eat up here, right? So salmon, trout, crab, mussels, clams, oysters, mushrooms, hazelnuts. These are all rich, fatty foods that need a great brightness to the wine, a great acidic cut, and a great balance. And so Chardonnay and Pinot Noir having the same DNA, because Chardonnay came from Pinot Noir essentially hundreds of years ago. These two wines deserve to be grown side by side and produced side by side. And so those are the two varietals that we have put all of our focus into here.
And then each of those are broken down in kind of the same way, where you have an estate bottling, single vineyards, and so forth.
Yes, absolutely. So we start our wine production starts with two wines in white and red: Cumberland Reserve, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. This is our business card wine. It's the best wine we make. We put so much time. We put 7 months of tasting barrels day in and day out to put this great wine together. It is a blend of our best barrels from the 5 vineyards that we farm. These are the wines that are meant to over-deliver this great regional character. They are regional champion wines. And for the money, these are wines that I think can be consumed on a regular basis. From there, we go up to our single vineyard levels. So you'll see the same label, but you'll see Bergstrom Vineyard or Celice Vineyard or La Spiral Vineyard. And these are our single estate monopole crus, meaning that these are vineyards we planted, we farm, we don't sell any of the grapes. We're the only people in the world who make these wines, and we bottle them individually as well. And then at the top level of our wine pyramid, you have a blend like Sigrid Chardonnay, which is named after my grandmother, who allowed my father to immigrate to the United States. And that, again, is a blend. So we start with blends, we get into single vineyards, and we end with a blend. And that's really a nod to my history of the first two winemakers I worked with were amazing blenders. And I was just mesmerized at how difficult and complicated it is to put this balanced blend together. And then the single vineyard terroirists, who I also loved and mentored under, or I was their mentee, showcasing terroir in individual places is so wonderful. And it's the minutia of winemaking that we all gravitate towards. And I think they're equal. They're just different ways of approaching wine. And so I like to do both. And we love to make blends, which, again, I think in the wine world, when you hear blend, you think different varietals put together. And I'm talking about 100% Willamette Valley, 100% Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, and 100% estate.
Yeah, and then just taking the characteristics from where they're grown and maybe the winemaking from that particular barrel or vat, and combining the best characteristics.
And so what sets us apart as well is that on Pinot Noir, we are 100% whole cluster winery, which means that we do not destem, and we like to ferment the grapes on the cluster as picked, which is minimal interventionist. But by putting all of our vineyards through the same lens of whole cluster fermentation and low new oak percentage. So some wineries will do 50% to 100% new oak. We use less than 15% new oak because what I want is the vineyard to shine through, the regionality and the terroir of each site to really show through. So we're not doing different things or different manipulations to each vineyard. We're treating them all the same, very gently. And then, so to be able to taste three of our wines side by side and see the differences and knowing it's not what we did to it, but it's how this place tastes, that is the reward in our style of winemaking.
Oh, that's awesome. So one other element that will go into how each bottle tastes is the vintage. Could you share a little bit? Looks like on our site right now we have some ranging all the way back to 2020, but maybe talk about the last 3-4 vintages that are available right now.
Sure. Vintage is paramount in a cool climate. So we are north of the 45th parallel, which means that to drive from my winery to Napa, California is almost 12 hours in a car. So we're further north. We get a lot more daylight than, let's say, Northern California does, but we don't get the heat. And we also get maritime influence, and in the fall get the jet stream that sags down and brings us weather. And so in a cool climate like Oregon's Willamette Valley, every vintage is going to be drastically different, and that's why we're here. We actually love the fact that Pinot Noir can behave so differently in so many different soils and then present itself differently in so many different vintages. And that's what keeps it such a puzzle. Every year is a fresh start. It's a whole new thing to discover. And because of climate change, which is true and real and happening, the Willamette Valley, much like Burgundy and other cool climates, is seeing warmer vintages. And what that means for the environment is unfortunate. What it means for the wine consumer is actually very high quality because we're not seeing rain and hail and frost routinely. We're seeing actually quite nice, warm, dry summers. And so Oregon is on right now a string of amazing vintages that is actually going on about 10 or 12. They vary slightly for sure. 2025, which we're just about ready to put into bottle, is, deep and dark and delicious and bright and spicy. 2024 is a wine for the cellar. It's got great acidity, great structure. It's going to need time. I would hold the 24s while you drink the 23s, which are very bodacious and plush and lovely and very fruited. 22 actually in the 24 camp has some great structure, very dark, very spicy. Those wines, the 22s and 24s, are going to live. If right now you have an anniversary in mind, 20 years down the road, those are the two vintages you want to buy. And then 21, one of these no rock or hard place scenarios, just comfortable vintage. And that's what the wines taste like. They're glorious. They're red fruited. They're soft. They're supple. So I would say, the last 5 vintages up here, quite lovely, but for different reasons and for different drinking purposes.
Oh, okay. Well, while we're on the topic of vintages, I always like to ask, If you have one specific or maybe a couple most memorable vintages, they can be good, they can be bad, but since you've been doing this for 30 plus years now, or almost 30 years, which ones stand out to you the most personally?
We tend to remember the hardest vintages because the easy vintages, there's no such thing as an easy vintage, but the easy vintages where it's sunny, it's warm, it's lovely. There's no rock or a hard place. That's Mother Nature's gift to us. That's like, here you go. And everyone should make great wines in those vintages. But years like 2011, 2010, 2007, very challenging, very late, lots of rain, bird pressure. For example, in 2010, we lost half of our crop to birds, migratory birds. In 2011, we didn't start picking fruit until November 1st, whereas this year we're going to start picking fruit probably at the end of August. So I tend to remember and love those more difficult vintages because naysayers will not want to buy them and will say, oh, it's challenging, I heard it rained. And then, of course, as these wines get to be 7, 8, 9 years old, everyone wants them because they've aged so well based on their structure and their acidity and just their integrity. So my favorite vintage has got to be 1999 because that was our first vintage, and my wife and I made our wine while working for someone else, and it was very challenging and stressful, but we're so proud of that wine. But since then, I would tend to latch on to the 2007, 2010, 2011, 2013 vintages because they were so hard. But that's what we're trained to do, is for those moments to really decide when we're going to pick at the right moment, how we're going to deal with difficult situations like rain. Did we farm correctly for the whole year? My business strategy has always been prepare for the worst and then hope to be pleasantly surprised. And, so when you do that in hard vintages, you're rewarded. And we have a library program here at Bergstrom Wines, and that's why you have some deep cuts there, is because we put a lot of wine into library and intentionally age it for 5 years, and then we re-release it to the market because we want people to be able to taste depth from us. We want them to be able to taste the new vintage, but also taste a 5 or 6 year old vintage to understand a little bit more about how our wines age and why we build structured wines to age.
No, that's amazing. I'm a big fan of the Willamette and your wines. So thank you so much for joining, and we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us for the Wine.com Day webinar.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, and I hope that all of your consumers out there get a chance to try our wines this year.
All right, that was Josh Bergstrom from Bergstrom Wines. I hope everybody got a good sense of the full breadth of the portfolio from Wilson Daniels, even though we kind of just scratched the surface. And we really appreciate your time today, William, for joining us on the Wine.com Day webinar. Is there anything you would like to leave our viewers here with before we go?
Well, I just wanted to say thanks again for supporting our winery partners. They are families after all. And hopefully you get a chance to dig into more of what our winery partners from the rest of the globe have with the Wilson Daniels portfolio. This is a great way for you to have 3 varying styles and different regions just within the 3 producers that we've interviewed and discussed today. So thanks.
All right, that will do it for our interview with Wilson Daniels. Thank you again for attending today and for being a stewardship member to get access to this exclusive webinar. And I hope you really enjoyed all the stories from the producer partners, as well as learning a little bit more about how Wilson Daniels works. Be sure to join us for day 2 and day 3 of our webinar series coming up. We have Winebow tomorrow with some really excellent producers, including Laura Catena from Catena Wines, one of the most famous voices in the wine world right now. And then on Thursday, we have Maison Marc and Domaine with some big names as well, including Domaine Art, Roeder Estate. So definitely join us for these next 2 webinars as well. But thank you again for joining today, and have a great rest of your week. That will conclude this webinar.